Hey guys, tonight you and I, step into a soft-breathing alley where paper lanterns comb the dark into ribbons of peach and gold, and the street sun settles like a cat in your lap. You smell sesame cakes toasting, a shy curl of charcoal, and that faint green hush only tea promises. We're drifting toward a lamplit tea house bench in Tang dynasty calm. And yes, the only real danger is that you probably won't survive this without getting very, very sleepy. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing the map of midnight and morning stretch across the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge softly, slowly, through a Tang dynasty night market, where lantern haze hangs above the crowd like a second, kinder sky. Vendors murmur prices as if telling bedtime stories to their bowls, and leaf-shaped signboards sway on iron hooks. Your sandals whisper over packed earth. A bamboo flute drifts between stalls like a friendly ghost. A mainstream fact to tuck behind your ear: by the mid-Tang, tea is no longer only medicinal, it's a social beverage, traded, taxed, and sold at stalls from Chang'an to Luoyang. You pause where a kettle rests on a brazier the size of a hat, the coals blushing as if they've just received a compliment. The tea seller flicks a gourd ladle, quirky tidbit, light as a sparrow, because some hawkers favor hollow gourds for skimming and scooping, cheap tools that love a graceful wrist. He calls his brew Spring First Leaves, probably as much marketing as meteorology, and you nod, because who hasn't believed persuasive packaging at 11 at night? That's joke one. We keep to the lamp-lit edge because the center lane is elbows and gossip, and your pulse tonight is set to pillow. The tea house waits where the alley curls into quiet. Its door is low enough to coax you into a bow, whether you mean respect or merely prefer keeping your forehead. A lantern keeper snuffs wicks with a tiny clay spoon so the soot won't autograph his skin. One of those small, ancient solutions that never needed an upgrade. You lift the latch, and the room accepts you the way warm water accepts a hand. Inside, light chooses corners, not the center. A strip of lamp brightness crosses the counter, where a cat conducts an audit of the chopped wood inventory. Two travelers share a bowl without hurry. The proprietor bows without fuss. You mirror him because form makes calm. If this were a modern cafe, you'd hunt the Wi-Fi password. Here, you count kettles and admire the discipline of the braziers, small, low, like conversations that know their inside voices. That's joke two. Your host slides over a wooden tray scored with faint knife marks. A clean bowl waits upside down so dust cannot practice acrobatics in its belly. On the shelf sit jars labeled River and Well, with a third marked Spring. We won't choose yet. Selection deserves a quieter mood than arrival. The kettle isn't rushing, just breathing, And later tonight, you'll learn to read that breath the way sailors read wind. You listen to the ventilation of 1,000 years, charcoal sigh, kettle whisper, sleeve brush, bowl click. We are not pressing cakes yet, not assembling tongs or ladles. We are arriving, and arrival is an art. A cup of water appears at your elbow, ordinary and therefore excellent. The cat abandons its audit and adopts you for administrative purposes, circling your ankles like it's filing your paperwork. That's joke 3. Curfew drums used to close these streets, then open them again for festivals. The Lantern Festival turned whole districts into seas of light. Historians still argue whether those permissive nights strengthened order by gathering people where watchmen could see them, or merely made everything prettier and more mischievous. Either way, the policy reaches you as a mood, sanctioned brightness, public hush, safe wandering. On a side shelf, a slim book waits, not for reading now, just for company, beside a brush and inkstone for catching a line when steam tunes the mind to patience. A bamboo clapper leans against the wall, once used to announce hot water on winter streets. You touch it and it answers with a small, polite knock. The air smells lightly of dried citrus peel and old wood. You become the person who measures minutes by how steam blurs a lantern's halo. The city wraps itself around this tea house the way hands wrap a warm bowl. Ordinary, protective, exactly enough. Outside, lanterns will trade shifts with dawn. Inside, the bench holds your small human weight like a seal on a letter that knows its address. You are here, not yet pouring, not yet choosing water, not yet listening for the kettle's secret consonants. You are the calm before activity, the open space the night makes for you, already present and already generous. You rest your palms on the warm wood, and the proprietor sets down a narrow, soot-kissed booklet the color of toasted rice. Threads stitch the spine in a simple loop, and on the first page a neat hand writes, "The Classic of Tea." You meet it like a person. No fanfare, just a small bow. And the pages answer with the thinnest crackle, as if the paper itself is exhaling. You skim by lamplight, while the cat resumes its audit from your lap, and the room seems to lean closer. A mainstream fact, stated softly. Sometime in the late 8th century of the Tang, Lu Yu composes this 10-chapter work, the first treatise to gather tea's origins, tools, methods, waters, and graces into one steady voice. You read a line that could be an instruction or a lullaby. Select with care. Heat with measure. Serve without haste. The chapters arrange themselves like the trays behind the counter. Origins first, then the making of cakes, then the apparatus, then the boiling, then the drinking, then the geography of leaves and springs. Each portion tucks into the next until a practice appears, not a recipe. You are not chasing flavors. You are rehearsing attention. You catch yourself smiling at how modern that sounds, like a mindfulness app with better typography. Joke 1. Lu Yu doesn't flirt with extravagance. He nods to fancy leaves, the ones hawkers call sparrow tongue, snow tips, and other persuasive birds, But the manual keeps redirecting you to the unshowy hammering of habit. Clean the brazier, judge the charcoal, listen for water before you look at it. Quiet patience, he implies, extracts more sweetness from an ordinary cake than impatience wrings from a princely one. It's the difference between wearing silk and moving like silk. A quirky tidbit lands like a lantern moth against the page. Bubbles have names. At first boil, you watch for crab eyes, tiny beads along the rim. Next comes fish eyes, larger and more certain. Then string of pearls, when the surface gathers itself into chains that climb and fall. The room provides a live demonstration because your host tends a kettle on low charcoal. And when you lean in, the metal hum tells you exactly where you are on that little map of water. You didn't know steam could speak fluent punctuation. The book is not shy about water either. It calls spring water best, river water acceptable, well water last and only with a sigh. It warns against torrents that bully the leaves and against ponds where the moon has been bored for weeks. The way it talks about water makes you laugh into your sleeve. If this text had a social account, it would rate every stream like a moody influencer. Joke 2. And yet, you feel the truth. Each sip is as much about the road it traveled as the leaf it meets. Lay out the tools, the book suggests, but only enough to keep the work graceful. You trace the list with a fingertip. Brazier to hold small coals, kettle with a reliable spout, tongs for charcoal, a scoop for powder, a ladle for pouring, a bowl for drinking, maybe a windshield for fickle nights. The manual loves things that do their job and then go quiet, and so do you. The cat approves this minimalism by occupying the most expensive item, which is, of course, your attention. Joke 3. You keep reading and the room keeps settling. In one passage, water is heated, whisked with a sliver of the pressed cake, skimmed with a gourd, then ladled into bowls whose clay carries its own whisper of mountain and kiln. The text favors a pure brew, leaf and water, unembroidered, yet it lives in a Tang world where cooks sometimes invite ginger, citrus peel, or a single grain of salt to the party. Historians still argue whether Lu Yu was prescribing an austere orthodoxy or gently nudging a spectrum of tastes toward clarity, and whether his powdered method foreshadows later whisking traditions or stands apart as a distinct boiled dance. What the book insists on more than anything is tempo. You move at the speed of the kettle, not the clock. You lift lids as if waking a child. You pour like signing your name very legibly. When the text says measure, it doesn't mean by spoons. It means by hearing. The soft consonant when water first meets powder. The vowel lengthening as aroma widens. The quiet approval you feel in your wrists. You start to understand how the perfect quiet pour is less a skill and more a relationship with breath. Your host taps the booklet spine and says nothing. He doesn't have to. The stove gives a small, confident exhale. A traveler 2 tables down sips with both hands and lets the bowl hide half his face like a miniature eclipse. You notice the carved diagram on the back page, a little stove with 3 legs, a windscreen like a folded fan, and a note about keeping fuel short so flames never lick the kettle in a hurry. Even the drawings are patient. And then there's geography tucked into the prose like a path through reeds. Regions differ. Some hills wrap leaves with mist and give you sweetness. Others grow in sun and deliver a cool, grassy clarity. The book lists celebrated locales the way someone might list childhood friends. You look at the jars, river, well, spring, remembering the manual's preference, and you feel a tug toward the jar with the fewest words written on it. That's the spell of this text. It makes the simple persuasive. Outside, the alley thins, and somewhere, a bamboo flute tries the same phrase again, then again, getting it right by getting quieter. You slide the booklet back across the counter. The cat resigns from your lap with great ceremony. You haven't brewed yet. You've done something older than brewing. You've agreed to a pace. The classic of tea closes with a whisper, and you hear the room answer. What matters is already present: care, water, heat, and your willingness to arrive before you pour. You watch the knight unbutton another quiet as the proprietor leads you behind the counter, where steam braids itself into the rafters like a patient ribbon. Fresh leaves wait in a low bamboo basket, their green turned glossy by a rinse of cool air and handling. The first work is not loud. You help feed the leaves into a shallow steaming pan. Cloth catches the drip. The room smells like rain, thinking about becoming forest. A mainstream fact laid down like a mat. In the Tang, common practice is to steam tea leaves, press them into compact cakes, dry them, and later grind those cakes to powder before boiling, an orderly choreography that makes tea travel well and brew predictably. The leaves soften under steam, as if someone has told them a secret they've been waiting to hear. You lift them with bamboo tongs, no heroics, just gentle scoops, and lay them on a woven tray where a paddle smooths them into an even bed. The paddle work is steady, a heartbeat you borrow for your own. The proprietor sprinkles a breath of rice flour on a wooden mold, so sticking won't ruin the mood. The mold's face is carved with a calm emblem, maybe a cloud, maybe a simple rhyme. He folds the leaves into the mold, lays a cloth, sets a matching board on top, and threads a rope through the slots like lacing a sandal. When he twists the rope with a wooden bar, you hear the small, relieved sigh of water leaving. If a gym ever offered Tang pressing, Forearm Day would finally make sense. Joke 1. The cakes come out the color of old jade, warm and obedient, edges straight as a good sentence. He sets them on racks over a low warmth to finish, not quite roasting, just persuading moisture to pack its bags. A quirky tidbit leans out of the steam. Some workshop molds carry little poems or auspicious beasts, a quiet branding before there was branding. So a host could say, "Try the Cloudmark cake," and you'd nod as if you were already meeting an old friend. This is not luxury, it's memory engineered into food. The cat inspects a cooling rack and, with impeccable professionalism, pretends not to want a bite of anything green. When the cakes are dry, they're firm enough to travel. You can imagine them stacked like tidy books in a porter's basket, the squares separated by paper that smells faintly of bamboo. By late Tang, officials keep an eye on this trade. Tea is taxed, and revenue is as persuasive as aroma. Historians still argue whether the earliest levies targeted production or markets first, and whether exemptions for monasteries were principle or practicality, but everyone agrees the leaf had become big enough to notice. You take a seat at a stone hand mill with a round top that turns on a quiet axis. The cake is broken into petals with a tap, soft chimes of future cups. You feed the pieces into the mill's mouth and turn the handle. The sound is not grinding so much as whispering, stone confiding in stone. Powder drifts out in a pale green snowfall, collecting in a wooden drawer. The rhythm of your arms settles into something like breathing, out on the push, in on the return. And for a few minutes, you possess the nicest job in China. Your phone's white noise app wishes it sounded this good. Joke 2. When the drawer fills, the proprietor passes you a fine bamboo sieve. You sift as lantern light pastes a golden rectangle on your knuckles. Coarser crumbs remain, the size of commas. The fine powder falls, the texture of a promise. Lu Yu's pages still close by would approve. Powder means even extraction and a level playing field for heat. Yet there's a human allowance here too. The older man mixes a pinch of the coarser bits back in, murmuring that a few gravel thoughts keep a cup honest. Historians still argue whether Tang-era mills generally produced flour-smooth powder or a deliberately mixed grind, and whether high-status households favored specialized querns or the same humble stones as everyone else. You look at your sleeves dusted pale green and feel promoted to a very quiet rank. The powder smells like a meadow at noon. Then, half a breath later, like a pine shadow. The cat hops onto the bench and leaves a paw print on the mill's rim, which is either a small blessing or a union rule. The proprietor smiles but does not chase perfection. He brushes the paw print aside with 2 fingers and saves the powder in a lidded jar. He writes the date with a brush, tonight's moon, tonight's leaf. Another cake is on the board now, and you notice the mold's edges worn smooth by years of rope and palm. If tools develop personalities, this one is a patient elder with good posture. The rope creaks in a friendly way. You lean your weight, feeling how strength becomes leverage and leverage becomes ease. The pressed square slides free again, another portable chapter for later nights. In some towns, people will chip a corner into a kettle when traveling, like snapping chocolate from a bar. You like the civility of that. Tea as readable portions, break where you need. Heat idles in the brazier while you work, its glow backstage, never demanding applause. You learn the order by feel. Steam, press, dry, grind, sieve, and store. Not rushed, not delayed. The powder jar joins the short line of bowls and implements already waiting their turn, out of the corner of your eye. But you resist peeking ahead. Your task belongs to this section of the night, and there's respect in not thinking 2 steps farther than your hand. In the alley, someone laughs once and then remembers the hour. You turn the mill slowly, one last revolution, like sealing a letter with an extra press of the thumb. The drawer is empty, the jar is full. The cakes on the rack exhale faintly as their edges finish tightening. Steam has thinned to a gauze no one minds lifting. You feel the rhythm of the process nested in you now, as plain and persuasive as breathing, a metronome set not by clocks, but by water and stone. You have learned how calm is pressed into a square and released as powder, a patient weather you can pour. You stand where the bench meets the work shelf, and the night arranges itself into small circles of purpose. The first circle is fire, so you set the brazier where drafts can't gossip about it. 3 squat legs, a grate that remembers every coal, and a ring that keeps the kettle from flirting with the flame. It's heavy in that reassuring way good doorstops and good decisions are. The cat inspects the ash pan and decides it is beneath its pay grade, which is the first management decision of the evening. Joke 1. Tongs sit beside the brazier. Bamboo for bold embers, iron for shy ones. You test their hinge with a quiet squeeze, a metronome for hands. The kettle waits with a lid that tilts the way a thoughtful eyebrow does, its spout long enough to speak softly into a bowl without splashing opinions. The ladle follows, gourd-bellied and lacquer smooth, light as a secret, and then the scoop, a thin bamboo crescent that measures powder the way a moon measures tide. Last, the bowl, wide-mouthed, handleless, a clay horizon that fits 2 hands. A mainstream fact to lean on while you breathe. In the Tang, people commonly drink from broad, handleless bowls, celadon or stoneware, cradled in the palms. The little handled cups you know from later centuries haven't claimed the stage yet. You set each thing down and the room gets quieter, fewer tools, more attention, like clearing icons off a phone so the wallpaper can finally be a sky again. Joke 2. The scoop rests across the bowl's rim, a bridge between dry and wet. The ladle claims a small saucer, so its lip stays honest. The tongs lie parallel, like a pair of well-trained fish. The kettle sits slightly off-center on the ring. That's not nervousness, that's airflow. Your sleeves remember the powder dust green from earlier, and you brush them once, as if telling your hands, "We're here now." A quirky tidbit peeks out while you straighten the windscreen, a folding collar of thin bronze that wraps the brazier like a polite embrace. Some hosts weave them from split bamboo in a pinch, tying the ends with silk thread. Others improvise with a fan propped on 2 chopsticks. A windscreen is nothing more than respect for flame wearing a small cloak, but it turns fussy sparks into conversation. You tap it. It answers with the softest ring as if in agreement. You test the bowl in your hands. The rim feels like a promise, neither sharp nor shy. You tilt it to catch lamplight across the glaze and see a faint wave where the potter's fingers coax the curve from breath and wheel. The bowl keeps the center of the night inside it. You place a second and a third beside the first because warmth is a social creature. Historians still argue whether the elaborate tool lists in Lu Yu's manual reflect common households or a scholar's ideal kit, and whether most people simplified to kettle, bowl, and scoop when the day's coins had other plans. Either way, the geometry of quiet doesn't change. The kettle's handle lifts and settles without complaint. You practice the motion. Up from the ring, turn 1 slow degree, pour from the shoulder, land the stream where the bowl's inner slope welcomes it, and then close the arc as if writing the letter you promised to write. Your wrist finds the path quicker than your mind does. You try the ladle too, skimming an imaginary foam and returning the arc to the kettle's mouth with a tidy click. Every tool is an extension of hearing. You don't need a drawer full of options. You need one thing that tells the truth. On the shelf waits a water jar, broad-shouldered, with a little cloud scratched near the neck by some earlier hand. You don't lift it yet. Water will have its own moment, but you greet it the way you greet a neighbor you truly like, a nod that says, "Later and well." A second jar marked "well" sits farther back, like a reminder that not every source is an equal friend. The proprietor's brush from earlier leans above them, hair trimmed to a point that could sign treaties or date jars with equal calm. You add a small brush rest to the arrangement, not for writing, but to rest the scoop without letting its lip kiss the table. A sliver of cloth appears for wiping condensation, folded so the edges align, the kind of folding that looks like a small ceremony because it is. The cat hops onto the empty tray, turns once, and settles with the authority of an official seal, thereby preventing you from misplacing exactly nothing. Joke 3. You think of modern kitchens with drawers that clang like cymbal practice, and you forgive them. This little corner doesn't clang. It holds. It makes room. It says, do one thing, then the next, and the next will be smaller than your breath. The brazier becomes a circle you honor by not crowding it. The kettle, a quiet companion who prefers understatement. The ladle, a diplomat between heat and bowl. The scoop, a librarian of green. The tongs, the steady hands you borrow when things get bright. Even the ashpan is a lesson in endings, where heat rests from being flame. You run your thumb along the kettle's spout and feel the faint seam where metal met metal centuries of designs ago. Somewhere, a craftsperson decided this curve would keep drips obedient, and you get to inherit that decision. Historians still argue whether the familiar three-legged stove was the dominant domestic model or simply one of many regional favorites, and whether urban tea houses adopted heavier ironwork than rural homes to endure constant service. Your brazier doesn't care about the debate. It cares about drafts. You take a breath and glance at the booklet again, not to read, but to remember the posture of its voice, unhurried, exact, quietly amused by human fuss. It does not command, it invites. The outline of your work has appeared in front of you, without a heading. Place the fire, place the kettle, set down the helpers, give each a resting place, remove anything that makes rest feel crowded. You have built a small geography where attention can stroll without bumping its shin on clutter. When you finally step back, the arrangement looks almost unfinished. That's how you know it's ready. There's air on the table, not just objects. Space is one of your tools now, too. The alley outside exhales, and the fan's low hum matches your own. A bowl waits, empty, and already comforting. The kettle keeps its counsel for a few breaths more, and you find that a quiet pour starts long before water. It begins here, with hands that choose less so ears can notice more. You turn toward the three jars the way a sailor turns toward stars, already calmer just for looking. Spring, river, well. The writing on the clay is quick and plain, brushed by a hand that trusted the wrist more than the flourish. You don't touch the spring jar first, you let your ears arrive. The proprietor lifts a shallow plate and tips a little from each jar in thin coins of water. You lean down and listen. Spring lands with a soft, glassy ping that brightens. River with a rounder plunk, like a pebble thinking twice. Well with a hushed thud, as if it prefers to keep its opinions in the cool. A mainstream fact, spoken as steadily as steam, the classic of tea praises living spring water above all, accepts river water with caution, and puts well water last, warning against stagnant depths and household buckets that borrow yesterday's mood. You sniff each plate, not dramatically, just a small practical breath. Spring smells like nothing in particular, which is exactly right. River carries a faint, honest breath of travel. Well offers a mineral whisper, stone forward and slightly introverted. Joke 1. You tilt the plates to watch how the meniscus moves. On spring, the edge is quicksilver. On river, it drifts with a trace of laziness. On well, it holds tight, loyal to itself. A desirable trait in friends, less so in tea. A quirky tidbit surfaces like a bubble at the kettle's rim. In Tang cities, and later among literati, some enthusiasts collect night rain from clean eaves, or even melt winter snow for ceremonial brews, believing the sky writes a softer water. Dew gathered from lotus leaves appears in poems as if the plant had bottled mildness for you. Whether that yields better tea or better verse is another conversation, but the habit shows up like a footnote in living rooms, small jars labeled with the weather. You smile, imagining a shelf that reads, "Night rain," "Courtyard snow," "Auntie's roof," "Do not ask." Joke 2. You take the spring plate and pour a thread onto the upturned bowl, listening to how the stream finds the curve. The sound is quick, silver, uncomplicated. You repeat with river, and the note fattens, as if a reed has joined the flute. The well water hushes the tone a little more, like a blanket over a bell. You hear it, the proprietor says, and you nod. Hearing clarity before tasting it feels like learning someone's laugh before their name. Historians still argue whether such acoustic tests were common practice or later romantic reconstructions around Lu Yu's quiet instructions, and whether the differences in water profile survive a good rolling boil over charcoal. You cup the spring plate and note the way coolness rises, leaner somehow, less clingy on the skin. You pour a little into the kettle, just enough to wake the metal, and tilt your ear. The first whisper against the base is light, a clean consonant. When you add river water to a second kettle as an experiment, the first rattle is thicker, the contact a touch more emphatic. It's like comparing two kinds of paper with your fingertips. Both are paper, but one carries ink in a friendlier way. The proprietor pushes over a thin bamboo dipper for you to play something like a percussionist's test. You tap the brims of the jars, spring rings high, river mid, well a little lower. You're not performing, you're learning how vessels report their guests. In markets where water sellers once called out their sources, this kind of listening wasn't fancy, just a skill for buying the day's calm with fewer regrets. The cat, serving as the night's sternest auditor, stations itself near the spring jar, which proves either the soundness of your method or the bribability of cats by proximity to interesting things. Joke 3. A little charcoal fuss later, both kettles begin their ascent toward speech. Here the bubble map returns to you. Crab eyes, fish eyes, string of pearls. The spring kettle reaches crab eyes with a dainty bias toward the rim, the surface bright and impatient to become language. The river kettle needs a heartbeat longer. The bubbles are rounder, the surface a touch more amiable than precise. You lift and listen. The spring kettle's breath is thin and clear, while the river kettle murmurs low. Neither is wrong, both are songs. One speaks the dialect the manual prefers. People used to swear the first bucket drawn before dawn made the best tea, meaning well water, because the well spent all night remembering to be still. You can see how that might help sediment settle and taste sharpen, custom becoming carefulness. Historians still argue whether such dawn rituals improved quality or simply improved attention, and whether talk of lively versus tired water reflects dissolved gas levels or the poetry households use to keep their chores companionable. You choose the spring jar with your hands, not your pride. It's heavier than the others, but somehow less stubborn against your wrist. You decant into the favored kettle and save river water for washing bowls later, a kindness to both waters. The well jar is not an exile. It waits like a cellar friend, excellent for food, excellent for life, simply not tonight's soloist. You brush a tiny splash from the table with the cloth folded earlier, and the fold stays square, which feels like the universe casting a supportive vote. A small note about geography hums through the room. The Tang world cataloged springs the way readers catalog favorite poets. Mountain seeps, cliff falls, shady ravines, each with a personality. Lu Yu's chapter on water reads like a travelogue of thirst, praising sources that run over stone, discouraging those that idle in mud. He doesn't need a laboratory to say what taste buds can test. Movement matters, cleanliness matters, and a certain brightness in the mouth earns your loyalty more reliably than a famous name on a jar. You test one last time, the pour from shoulder height in a pencil-thin line. Spring holds together like a silk thread. River wavers a breath sooner. Well beads into droplets that catch the lamplight like tiny moons plotting a heist. You laugh at your seriousness and then keep it, because seriousness at this scale becomes play, the easy, competent kind you did as a child when you built houses of cards just to feel the air move carefully around your hands. Decision is not drama. You place the spring jar behind the brazier like an honored friend at a good seat. The kettle accepts its portion without splashy commentary. The windscreen hums a little approval as the charcoal glows up to meet the job. You find yourself breathing in the same tempo as the water warms, slower at the bottom, quickening at the rim, then slowing again to hold. The night has given you 3 choices and a way to choose them that feels like listening to weather. And even before the first leaf meets the first shimmer, you can already taste the quiet. You build the fire like you're tucking in a small animal that likes compliments. With the tongs, you choose charcoal the size of walnuts for the base, then 3 pieces like plums, then 1 modest parent lump that will keep its dignity while the others get enthusiastic. You nest them on the grate, where the windscreen makes a quiet harbor. The brazier accepts the arrangement with a little metallic click, and the night leans closer to watch you succeed at something delicate. A mainstream fact to steady your hands. By the tongue, household and tea-house braziers commonly burn charcoal, cleaner, steadier, and less smoky than raw wood, so water can be heated with minimal drama and maximum manners. You coax a twist of rice straw under the grate and give it a spark. The straw answers with a whisper, a brief honey smell. The smallest charcoal shows first interest, reddening like a polite blush at a dinner introduction. You fan once with a palm, just once, and the fire says yes. A sliver of pine spills a bright idea through the gaps. You place the windscreen around the brazier so the idea stays an ember and not a rumor. The cat, who has promoted itself to fire marshal, sits exactly at the safe distance, tail curled like punctuation that means good job. Joke 1. You remember how the bubble map goes. Tonight you'll read it like weather. But first you set the kettle just off center on the ring for better airflow, a hair to the left as taught by someone whose left hand remembered the lesson. Metal meets ring with a dignified tap, and the spring water inside relaxes into the shape of its job. The flame doesn't touch the kettle, it converses with it. You nudge one plum-sized coal a finger's width inward, a choreography of embers, and listen for the first subtle note inside the kettle body that almost syllable water makes when it wakes. The surface stirs without breaking, a cat's breath beneath a blanket. Then along the edges, crab eyes, tiny pearled beads collect like secrets at a party. You tilt your gear, smiling at your own seriousness. It's a good seriousness, the kind that turns attention into comfort. At this stage, you lift the lid a thumb's breadth to let a whisper out, not to rush anything, just to make sure you and the kettle are in the same paragraph. Historians still argue whether Lu Yu's famous bubble descriptions codified an existing oral practice or created the vocabulary tea people adopted afterward, and whether those stages are best judged by sight, by sound, or by the kinder combination of both. You add one small breather coal, no larger than an apricot pit, at the rear, creating a gentle gradient under the kettle's belly. The water's voice replies with a light punctuation mark, a barely there tisk that means, I heard you. A quirky tidbit drifts up with the steam. Some tea hawkers called their hand bellows fire fans and decorated them with painted cranes or lines of verse, claiming the birds kept the flames courteous. Whether cranes care about etiquette is unclear, but the bellows do. You don't need one tonight. Your nest is tidy, your draft correct, your windscreen patient. Crab eyes thicken to fish eyes, round beads that rise with intent and pop like polite applause. You slide the kettle a fraction to the right, airflow again, and the applause deepens to a small regular murmur. If you were careless, you'd let the boil gallop to a rolling roar and bully the spring water into shouting. Instead, you keep it at the exact point where the surface respects its margins. The gourd ladle waits in its saucer. The scoop naps on its brush rest. You stand like a lighthouse keeper, who mostly watches and occasionally moves one stone a very small distance. Joke 2. You learn the color of heat by reflection. The brazier's glow shines through the gaps in an orchard of embers, some fruit bright, some dim with thought. You turn one with the bamboo tongs and feel the mild shock through the hinge, the world's reminder that attention is not theory. The kettle speaks again, slightly lower. The string of pearls begins, a few lines of beaded ascent from the pot's navel toward the lid's underside, a metered recitation. You lift the lid a hair, and the steam writes briefly on your face before losing the thread. If you were telling this to a friend, you'd say the bubbles each have a temperature, yes, but also a mood. Crab eyes are curious, fish eyes earnest, pearls composed. You are not waiting for a number. You are waiting for character. That's the secret the manual keeps handing you. Water, when properly encouraged, will inform you of its readiness in complete sentences. If you listen well enough, a thermometer can spend the evening in its drawer composing sonnets about irrelevance. Joke 3. The charcoal nest needs one kindness, a little clearing in the center, a small dark well that encourages the hottest breath to rise without licking metal. You tease apart two coals, creating that hollow. The kettle sighs in grateful bass, a touch of ash drifts up, and then decides it has nowhere important to be. You brush the ring with the cloth folded earlier, and the fold remains crisp, your own little ritual of order returning to its chair. You test the patience of the boil with the ladle. Dip, lift, listen. When you return the ladle to the kettle's mouth, the sound is a decisive but calm chime. Another mainstream confirmation slips into your ear. Charcoal's steady heat, unlike the fire fist of resinous wood, favors controlled stages, ideal for the Tang method of bringing powdered tea and water into a measured dialogue instead of an argument. Your hands memorize the distance the ladle travels, the angle of the wrist's arc, the way your shoulder stays low so your pour later won't arrive as a sermon, but as a conversation. The alley beyond the door lets a stray draft nose against the windscreen, but your small harbor holds. You set aside a reserve of pea-sized coals in the bowl to feed the nest between rounds. Your wrist has learned where heat abides, your ear where readiness dwells. The cat curls nearer, confident you've reached the chapter of the night when competence writes its own lullaby. The kettle, with that delicate constellation of pearls rising and falling, offers the sentence you've been waiting to hear. Now would be gracious. You do not rush to pour. You let the pearls continue for a brief, slow stanza, just enough to anchor the water's vocabulary. Pair by pair, you pinch the nest narrower so the heat plateau holds without climbing. You are the governor of a small province where everything runs on time because time itself has forgotten to hurry. The kettle's breath is even. The flame's grammar is correct. Your hands are not performing, they are participating. You have made good weather in a circle of iron and clay. When you finally lift the kettle, the nest keeps glowing, a little red moon orchard waiting for your return. You pause to look once, the way you glance back at a made bed, appreciating what steadiness looks like when it's done well. The cat blinks slow approval. The bubbles retire from pearls to a shy ripple as the kettle leaves its ring. Heat has carried spring water to the door of speech and left it smiling. Everything that follows will be easier because you kept the conversation quiet. You set 3 tiny saucers on the tray, the way you'd set out moons for a small sky. One for salt, one for ginger, one for dried citrus peel. And you promise yourself you'll keep the night's voice intact. The kettle holds its string of pearls with patient dignity. The brazier croons a lullaby in ember syllables. In the jar, a pale hill of powder waits, green as a quiet meadow. Tonight, you're not trying to make tea taste like something else. You're learning what a whisper can borrow from a neighbor and still stay itself. A mainstream fact to walk beside you: in the Tang, tea is often boiled with a touch of salt, and cooks sometimes flirt with additions like ginger or dried tangerine peel. Yet the classic of tea leans toward simplicity: water, tea, and perhaps the smallest correction, not a bouquet. Later ages will whisk and steep with even stricter austerity, but here in this lamp-lit century, a pinch can be permission, not perfume. You take the smallest, kindest spoon you can find, really a sliver of bamboo, and tap a few grains of salt into the first saucer. It looks like nothing, which is perfect. Anything that looks like too much is too much. Salt's job, you remind yourself, isn't to arrive with sirens. It's to take the corners off bitterness and stand behind sweetness like a friend who lets you do the talking. Joke 1. You dip the gourd ladle into the kettle for a sip of hot water, no leaves yet, just a rehearsal stage, and dissolve the crystals. The taste is cleaner, not louder, as if the water straightens its spine. Next, you shave the faintest coin of ginger, so thin it checks itself for existence twice, and lay it in the second saucer. Ginger's warmth belongs to the body more than the tongue. It doesn't change flavor so much as temperature's personality. You pour a breath of hot water over it, and wait a few seconds for steam to write a sentence you can read. A soft prickle rises along your throat, like wearing a tiny scarf you forgot you owned. You smile, the cat does not. Ginger is beneath its culinary philosophy. Joke 2. For the third saucer, you take a strip of dried citrus, the color of a very patient sunset. Tangerine peel from last winter, cured until the pith went shy. You warm it between your fingers first. Its perfume wakes with gratitude rather than enthusiasm. When you pour over it, a bright medicinal memory swims up. Pomanders in chests, peel hung from rafters like little flags, kitchens that smelled like stained glass looks. A corky tidbit flutters down. Some households string citrus peel under the eaves all summer, letting the wind turn them into tiny pennants. When the season shrugs into cold, those ribbons become the quietest spice shelf, reaching for kettles like a neighbor waving hello. You sip each saucer, not to decide the night's fate, but to learn the grammar of the smallest helps. The salted water tastes like somebody wiped the lens clean. Gingered water feels like your pulse remembered a winter lane. Citrus water glides along the top notes and leaves an echo of orchard. Put together, you could build a soup. That is exactly what you're not doing. The classic's voice drifts through your head. Let the leaf speak. If the water has a small complaint, ease it. Don't argue it. Historians still argue whether Lu Yu's nod at salt was permission or mere observation, whether his patience constituted a protest against extravagant tea suits fashionable in some kitchens, and whether these tiny helps were daily practice or festival exceptions. They also wrestle with the motive. Was salt about leaf bitterness, water hardness, or the era's broader culinary habit of seasoning hot drinks the way we might season broth? You don't adjudicate, you listen. Listening is the whole sport tonight. You measure the leaf. The scoop lifts a crescent of powder into the clean bowl, just enough to tint a winter cloud. You trail a single grain of salt across your fingertip, and then, this matters, let it fall back into the saucer. You're testing possibilities, not feeding egos. And a grain of salt is the kind of extrovert that can dominate a room without realizing it. Joke 3. Instead, you decide to slide a breath of the salted water into the kettle itself, a correction at the level of weather, not wallpaper. The ginger and citrus you reserve as learning chords, not ingredients. If you use them later, it will be to comfort a cold hour, not to impress a crowd. The kettle answers in complete sentences now, a low, even consonance. You lift the lid with 2 fingers and let the steam brush your face, the way a cat's tail might pretend to be accidental kindness. The bubbles still wear pearls, the surface still respects its margins. You dip the ladle into the salted sample and tuck a mouthful into the kettle, no more than a sigh. The sound of the pour belongs in a library. You taste the air and feel nothing change, which is exactly the change you wanted. A smoothing of edges so the leaf can keep its vowels when you introduce it to heat. If a friend barged in and asked what you were up to, you'd say you're giving water a counseling session. Short, friendly, and confidential. You're not banning ginger and citrus, you're promising the leaf that tonight it can speak solo. Still, you practice the ginger and citrus in a separate bowl with plain hot water, just to teach your whist what not to do when the real pour begins. The ginger pour wants to arrive heavy and late. You correct your angles so it arrives like a suggestion. The citrus pour tries to show off at height. You lower your shoulder and land it like a pencil line instead of a neon sign. Outside, the alley is half asleep, its last gossip soft as bats pretending to be maps. Your tools hold their shadows, scoop like a crescent moon, ladle like a little planet, bowl like a horizon. Somewhere in the rafters, a strand of peel from another season sways, a reminder that kitchens keep calendars by scent. You reach for the cloth, dab a ring of condensation from the tray, and set the saucers aside. What you've learned will ride under the next minutes like a quiet keel, salt as clarity, ginger as warmth, citrus as brightness, each ready to be invited or politely left at the door. You exhale the kind of breath that begins sentences like now without even saying it. The powder waits, the kettle agrees, the brazier tucks its glow closer. There is nothing flashy about the moment before leaf meets water, and yet this is the hinge the whole night turns on. The discipline to season the room, not the cup, so the cup can season you. You lift the kettle as if picking up a sleeping cat, steady wrist, low elbow, and the breath from the spout grazes your knuckles like a polite hello. The bowl waits in both hands. You do not add leaf yet. This is rehearsal, a first pour to temper clay and fingers, to let the room hear what the water intends. The string of pearls inside hums the same phrase 3 times, and you catch yourself breathing in triplets. The ladle rests, the scoop watches. Everyone's on their mark. The pour begins not at the rim, but just inside it, where the bowl's curve offers a slope. You aim for that slope the way you'd aim a kind word, soft, specific, and uninterested in splashing. A thread of water lands and slides around the inner horizon, carrying a thin ribbon of steam that smells only of spring and fire. The bowl wakes without flinching. Your hands wake with it, the warmth running up the heel of the palm. You tilt and roll so the entire inside meets heat, then settle the bowl so it can teach your fingers what this temperature means. A mainstream fact rides the steam. Tang-era tea is often served in broad, handleless bowls, and hosts regularly warm vessels before brewing so the first sip isn't startled by cold clay. The same simple courtesy you see across tea cultures. Clean tools, attentive heat, and vessels that arrive at the table already ready. You cradle the bowl and listen. Hot but not bossy. The night approves. Outside, a late footstep edits itself into quiet. You do the test again, this time paying attention to the sound of the pour rather than its path. From high, the thread hisses. From lower, it murmurs. When the spout is close and the angle modest, the note becomes a hush you feel more than hear. The consonant of almost boiling water introducing itself to pottery that doesn't mind introductions. You'll know the moment, the proprietor said earlier, which is helpful in the same way people say, you'll know true love. Joke 1. You try 3 heights and decide your kettle likes an approach from 2 finger widths above the rim. You pour a little into a second bowl, then a third, each time rolling, each time emptying into the rinsing basin that sits like a discreet moon under the tray's lip. Not one drop returns to the kettle. This water has done its job. A quirky tidbit edges in with the steam. Some night hawkers used to warm bowls against the kettle wall, rotating them slowly while calling out verses about heat like weather reports. The bowl wears a thin coat. The bowl wears a medium coat. The bowl is walking around in spring. Whether the poetry improved performance is unclear. It certainly improved the cue's mood. When you lift the kettle again, you let the steam announce readiness to your wrist. It rises in a clean column, not a ragged fog. The spout breath whispers, not panting, not sulking. You adjust your grip by a hair, thumb farther forward, and the kettle suddenly feels less like an object and more like a sentence you're about to finish. Historians still argue whether this preliminary pour and warm ritual was common in Tang tea houses or mostly a scholar's refinement preserved in manuals, and whether the test pour as a codified step belongs to later gung fu habits grafted back onto earlier practice. You temper your hands one more time, because hands also drink heat. A swirl, a roll, a small clink as the bowl meets wood. You notice how the glaze's sheen brightens with warmth, a shallow lake catching lamplight. The cat approves by ignoring you more profoundly, which is cat for applause. Joke 2. You slide the warmed bowls into a shallow procession, not equidistant like soldiers, but close enough to feel they share the job. Now the test of the stream's character. You hold the kettle higher than service height and let one thin thread fall into the basin. Does it fray in air? Does it thicken into a rope? Tonight it behaves like silk pulled through a ring, continuous, soft, uninterested in showing off. You lower to service height and watch the thread narrow without breaking, then angle the spout until the sound lands exactly where your ear has been waiting. If you were teaching a friend, you'd say aim not just for a target in space, but for a timber in your chest. You practice a short arc, the one that will soon visit leaf. In, around and out, never stopping in the center, never scolding the powder with a splash. You rehearse temper and withdraw, like a dancer marking steps in stocking feet before the stage opens. The ladle joins the rehearsal, tapping the rim of the kettle, then resting again in its saucer with that tiny porcelain kiss you could find in the dark. You check the charcoal nest with the corner of your eye, still orderly, still glowing like a patient orchard. One more pass through the bowls, this time with intent. Warm, wipe, present. You tilt each bowl toward the lantern so the guest, the tea, and also you can see the color of readiness. The cloth does a small pilgrimage around rims, catching beads before they become surprises. It occurs to you that all of this would look like ceremony to someone in a hurry, and then it occurs to you that ceremony is just a name for patience wearing its favorite coat. Joke 3. You keep your coat on. The kettle's voice drops a fraction, edging from pearl to pre-boil confidence. You slide it half a finger breadth off the hottest spot, holding the plateau with an almost comical seriousness that feels wonderful. Steam threads past your cheek, making a small weather on your skin. The scoop is already half raised, the jar of powder within reach, the bowl warm as an invitation. You are not waiting anymore. You are listening for permission. Permission comes as a moment of agreement between hand and sound. The spout's breath is steady, the surface within the kettle speaks in small regular syllables, and your fingers feel ready rather than brave. You set the kettle down, not quite, then lift it again, confirming the weight that will carry the first true pour. The room narrows kindly around the tray until there is only this circle of iron and clay and heat and water and you. You flex the wrist once, a bow returning a bow. The warmed bowls hold their heat like good secrets. The basin glints with the rehearsal's discarded water, proof that practice has already made the night easier. You have learned how to temper clay and skin, how to test a stream for honesty, how to read a kettle's breath for now instead of soon or not yet. The leaf waits without impatience. Your hands answer without noise. It is time to let powder meet weather. You tip the scoop and let the powder fall in a soft green dune at the bowl's center. Then level it with the back of the scoop, the way you'd smooth a blanket before sleep. The warmed clay holds the scent and returns it as a whisper. Grass after rain, pine shadow, a hint of chestnut if you tilt your head toward memory. The kettle's breath is steady, pearls climbing and dissolving with the patience of someone folding letters they've already read. You bring spout to rim height, exhale once, and draw a narrow thread of water onto the inner slope so it glides toward the powder like weather arriving over a hill. A mean stream fact eases in with the steam. Lu Yu's classic suggests a 3-stage boil. First boil, fish eyes at the edges. Second, string of pearls. Third, a lively surge. And notes that salt may be introduced around the second stage, with tea joining as the water approaches its composed height, never at a ragged roar. You honor that counsel by landing only enough water to wet the top, then pausing as the powder accepts it. The surface darkens, a tiny bloom. Aroma nudges your cheek, Green turns warm, shy turns curious. You lift the bowl and, with a small wrist tilt, rotate once to encourage even soaking. Now the spirals. You set the bowl down and, with the gourd ladle held like a pen, trace a fingertip-sized circle just under the surface. No splashing, no theatrics. The water begins to carry the powder, a galaxy forming from one quiet eddy. You make a second circle in the opposite direction to keep the center from bossing the rim. These are not stirs so much as invitations. The liquid lightens shade by shade, a fern unfolding. You feel your shoulders relax in direct proportion to how small the circles stay. Joke 1. A line of foam appears at the far edge, not a cap, just punctuation. You guide it gently toward the center with the ladle's lip and let it meet itself there. Then, with a light touch, you skim and return the skim to the rinsing basin. Tea wants clarity tonight. A quirky tidbit tiptoes into your ear. Some Tang hosts carved a tiny poem inside their gourd ladles, so each skim revealed a word. By the third skim, the line completed itself, a secret stanza only Bekettle ever fully heard. Whether that improved flavor is unprovable, it absolutely improved patience. You resume the spirals. 3 small, 1 wide, pause. 3 small, 1 wide, pause, like breathing with the bowl. The surface begins to polish, the liquid's texture turning from water with things in it to a single coherent voice. Heat slips into your hands through the clay and pulses. Steam rises in tidy threads, not clots. If you were calling this out like a sports commentator, you won't. You'd say the leaves' oils are moving from shyness to confidence, the nose turning from cut grass to toasted grain and back again, with a hint of citrus you didn't add. Joke 2. The kettle keeps its pearls, you keep your circle. Historians still argue whether Tang drinkers celebrated froth the way song whiskers later would. Did they cultivate a deliberate tea flower on the surface, or did they view persistent foam as a fault to be skimmed away for clarity? The manual leans toward clarity, but poems from kitchens and monasteries praise pale blossoms on bowls as if a little cloud had come to set. The truth may be that practice varied by region, by water, and by personality. Tonight, you court a thin collar of bubbles that breaks quickly, a ring that kisses the rim and then remembers to leave. Your spiral's slow. You rest the ladle across the bowl for a count of 7 breaths. The number is less important than the unbroken counting. Then lift again and pull one silent comet through the center to settle the currents. The scent rises fuller, rounder, not loud, just sure. You test with a half sip, lifted by ladle to lip, and then blown cooler with a single puff. The flavor lands soft on the front of the tongue, then steps back with a faint sweetness that doesn't insist on the name. You aim for the moment before boldness, the sweetness that still shares the sentence with grain and leafy shadow. You adjust the charcoal nest with 2 quick tongs touches, one coal inward, one outward, to keep the kettle in its plateau. A drop of condensed steam falls from the lid's underside and rings like a tiny bell when it touches the ladle. You smile because the night is collaborating. The bowl's color has deepened to a quiet jade, Its surface, when you tilt it to the lantern, holds the light in a single even sheet. Your circles become smaller yet, now more like punctuation marks than words. Here is the test the proprietor taught without speaking. Rest the ladle edge just at the surface, then lift it away a fraction. If a thin satin film follows and then slides back into place, you've reached the part of the sentence where a period would be too abrupt and a comma just right. If it breaks like a brittle window, you stirred too little. If it clings like soup, you stirred too much or waited too long. Tonight it behaves like silk, remembering gravity. Joke 3. You whisper, yes, though no one asked. You consider whether to return a spoonful to the kettle's mouth, just to keep a thermal conversation going, and decide on a single delicate ladle back, which the kettle accepts with a soft approval. Heat, flavor, texture, all in conversation, none in competition. A mainstream reminder hums under your fingers. Tang preparation commonly boiled the infusion briefly and then portioned by ladle. You're using a hybrid of bowl mixing and kettle keeping that reflects both the text's guidance and the room's kindly equipment, letting the water stay at its patient height while you court the leaf to confidence. Another skim, quick and light, gathers the last shy froth into the ladle, which you tip into the basin. The surface left in the bowl is glossy as a still pond. You lean in. The nose is now certain. Grain, grass, pine shadow, and that trace of citrus that arrived on its own, as if the leaf had tucked summer away for you and is now unpacking it one scent at a time. You listen to the room, and it seems to listen back, everything briefly organized around this green center. You let the bowl rest, undisturbed, for the length of a slow count to 12. In that small stillness, the heavier notes settle, and the lighter ones gather at the top like birds finding their evening wire. Your wrist relaxes, the ladle returns to its saucer with that tiny porcelain kiss, and the kettle breath continues its small regular syllables. If impatience knocks, it finds no door here. The aroma has crossed its threshold from shy to sure. The tea is itself, reachable, steady. You lift the bowl again, not to serve, not yet, but to welcome the weight and warmth you've made together. The spirals are done. The surface holds. The night, having watched you draw circles into quiet, will now allow those circles to widen into company when it's time. For now you cradle the bowl as if it has always belonged to your hands, and let the steam write the last of its gentle sentences on your face. You shift the warmed bowl a hand's width to make space for company, and feel the night widen with it. The kettle still speaks in pearls. The brazier still keeps its orchard glow. You cradle the mixing bowl, then lift the ladle and portion the tea into 3 smaller bowls set like quiet satellites around your work, 1 ladle each, then a second pass to even their horizons, never filling to the rim so steam can rise without feeling crowded. The first bowl goes to the elder seat, the second to the honored guest, the third nearer to the door where the room breathes best, and only then do you consider your own. A mainstream fact keeps your posture honest. Across Tang society, tea has already become social ritual. Tea houses in cities like Chang'an and Luoyang bustle with travelers, scribes, and merchants, and in private homes, Vessels are offered and received with two hands, the simplest grammar of respect. You present the first bowl with both hands and a small bow, not theatrical, a nod the steam can pass through without getting bent. You rotate the bowl so the smoothest part of the rim faces the guest. Your thumbs step back so your fingers can carry the weight like a small bridge. The guest answers with both hands too, wrists level with the heart, the kind of exchange that steadies a room almost by accident. If you tried to do it dramatically, you'd look like you were returning a borrowed moon. Joke 1. Instead, you breathe where the bowl breathes and let clay transfer warm to skin the way dusk transfers calm to streets. The second bowl goes down a quiet arc of air. You keep it low, below the line of eyes, above the worry of elbows. The steam reaches you first, then the faint toast of leaf, the sigh of citrus that arrived without invitation, the brushing sweetness you found in those small spirals. You do not say, "Careful, it's hot," because the bowl is already explaining. The room knows when to lift and when to linger. And you learn that silence is not absence, it's etiquette with good balance. A quirky tidbit arrives wearing straw. Some hosts place woven coasters, little mats called tea seats, under bowls so lacquer doesn't grow jealous and bowls don't skate when elbows laugh. The more patient households tie a tiny knot at one corner of each mat to mark the season when they were made, as if time had a small handle. The coaster under the elder bowl wears a spring knot, yours a winter knot, lending the table a private calendar you suddenly love for its refusal to announce itself. You pass your own bowl last to yourself with the same two-handed respect. It sounds silly, and then it doesn't. Your body believes what your hands rehearse, and tonight your hands rehearse that nothing loud is required to feel taken care of. The cat, appointed usher, escorts a draft out the door by glaring at it. Joke 2. You settle, and the three of you, guest, elder, you, regard the surfaces as if the night has set out three small lakes to teach you how to look gently. When you finally drink, you do it in two breaths, a sip to greet, a sip to listen. The first rush is warmth, the second a soft bloom of grain and grass, then a clear space where sweetness lingers like an afterthought that remembered to be kind. You don't gulp, you don't crinkle your eyes with bravado. You let the bowl's weight do what weight does, slow you down until the room can keep up. You keep your elbows tucked, not stiff. You keep your shoulder low. You let exhale be the loudest thing you do. Steam writes tiny epigraphs on your knuckles. You read them as an excuse to pause. You tilt the bowl just enough that light lays a crescent on the surface, proof that you haven't hurried the cup into a slosh. Around the table, the choreography remains soft. Bowls land with no clatter, sleeves don't swim over neighbors' saucers, voices graze rather than grab. Historians still argue whether urban Tang tea houses enforced seating strictly by rank or simply by arrival order, and whether women frequented such spaces routinely or mostly on festival nights. What survives in manuals and poems is less rule book than mood, gentleness as policy. You refresh the elder bowl first, not because hierarchy insists, but because warmth travels fastest where attention is pointed. One ladle, then a thinner second, the way you water a plant that prefers mist to rain. If foam begins to rehearse a speech, You skim it in a single respectful gesture, returning it to the basin where discarded practice becomes tomorrow's story for the drain. The guest lifts the bowl and offers a small nod that lands exactly between thanks and please continue this forever. You manage the room the way you manage the kettle, by moving very little, very precisely. In the corner, a traveler scrapes a bench soft as sand. You adjust the charcoal nest with the bamboo tongs, one pea-sized coal inward, one outward, and the kettle answers with its steady consonants. The windscreen winks in lamplight like a shy shield. You notice the way conversation, when it comes, blooms at the edges, never in the center. The center belongs to heat and water, to bowls touching wood with the soft consonants of the night's chosen punctuation. If someone were to ask for rules, you'd offer none and then offer these. Hold with two hands, place softly, speak across the bowl, not through it, serve others before yourself, unless your hands are the kettle's hands, in which case you are part of the tool list and tools don't get fussy. Joke 3. You do not wave the ladle in the air like a flag. You do not count sips out loud as if doing tea arithmetic. You do not chase the last drop with your tongue. You take the last, smaller sip because leaving a little for the table's thirst is a prettier story than scraping the bowl's memory. The elder lifts his bowl halfway and sets it down again, the universal sign of, this is the right temperature and also the right life. You answer with a top-up that respects that middle state. The guest turns the bowl a fraction, aligning the knot on the mat with the seam of the bowl as if acknowledging a seam in time. Across the threshold, the alley's hush stands watch. Inside, etiquette is not a corset, but a cardigan. Soft, warm, open in front, prepared for weather without predicting it. You take your own bowl again and feel the warmth renew its promise to keep company all the way down. The cat closes its eyes in agreement, which is the highest form of review. You realize that the soft choreography, warming, portioning, passing, receiving, refilling, has done something generous to your breathing. The pour has stayed quiet, the room has stayed unruffled, and somehow, in a city that can be 1,000 drums by daylight, your night belongs to 3 human hands and the small lakes they carry. The elder tips his bowl towards you, a small moon setting, and rises without scraping the bench. You follow him out through the alley's thinning lanterns, past shutters that breathe in their sleep, until the city loosens its grip and stone steps begin. Pines lean in. The air lifts a cool sleeve to your cheek. A wooden board speaks once, thok, and somewhere deeper, a bronze bell gathers a breath big enough to share. The night divides itself into watches, and your feet learn a slower way to be on the earth. The gate wears its moon intact. Inside the courtyard is laid out like the inside of a thought. Straight lines, kind corners, nothing to prove. A small spring keeps its promise under a stone lip. You hear it before you see it, which is how good water introduces itself. The elder sets his bowl down near the eaves, and you notice a kettle already waiting on a 3-legged stove, a modest twin to the one you've tended all evening. Its fire has the manners of a library. You bow to the hall the way you bowed to the tea house, no extra flourish, just enough spine to be understood. A mainstream fact wrapped in the hush. By the late Tang, tea steadies monastic life. Chan monks especially drink it during long meditation and night chanting to keep the mind clear and the body from folding itself into sleep. Monasteries give tea alms to travelers. Poems by monk poets turn cups into little sermons about wakefulness. What you hold is not an indulgence, it's a tool with a pleasant personality. The elder guides you down a covered corridor where lamps float like tame stars. A wooden fish hangs by a cord, its carved scales worn glossy by years of careful drumming. When a novice nudges it with a padded stick, the sound is bright but not bossy, a pulse to gather attention without bruising it. A quirky tidbit winks at you here. The fish is chosen because fish never close their eyes, a reminder to stay awake. The hall hangs a fish so your eyelids remember their dignity. You thank the carp silently for its peer pressure. You pass the meditation hall, its long platforms rolled with folded robes. A row of statues watches, each face profoundly uninterested in your personal brand of fidget. Your own posture improves by proximity. Joke 1. Another wooden signal, the Han, a thick board, announces nothing and everything with 3 firm knocks that expand into the silence as if the night were a bell and the board a small, steady hammer. The elder's sleeve whispers. He pushes open a side door. Inside, 4 monks tend a small, serious kettle. No garnish bowls, no ginger saucer auditioning for attention. Just the leaf, the water, the brazier, and hands that know how to wait. The spring you heard in the courtyard seems to speak again through the kettle's body. Crab eyes, then fish eyes, then the modest pearl run you earned earlier. The elder places your familiar scoop and bowl near the stove like a reunion of old friends. No one says a lot because the sounds are already doing the talking. You pour the spring with the same respect you practiced, though here your wrist bends even less. The room prefers understatement on principle. The elder nods once, a permission you accept without announcement, and you lay a quiet dune of powder in a bowl. The kettle's breath makes the thin, glassy vowel that has meant now all night. You land the thread on the inner slope, bring the powder to readiness with 2 small spirals, and skim foam as lightly as if removing a cloud that landed in the wrong chapter. You think of the cat. The cat, wisely, has not taken vows and remains at the tea house counting coals. Joke 2. Passing bowls in a monastery reshapes your hands. 2 palms, a bow small enough to fit under the lamps, the rim angled so steam climbs rather than escape. You set 1 bowl by the bell rope, another near the wooden fish, a third beside a stack of sutra boards as if warmth could read. No one drinks yet. The Brahms bell exhales a single note that lives in the room for longer than the room deserves, and in that long, round silence, breath settles. You do not feel the quiet. You practice the polite art of not adding yourself to air. Historians still argue whether Chan monasteries were the principal engine that turned tea from cure to companion. Did the halls make daily cups normal, or did urban tea houses and court habits carry the larger weight? They also question whether the monastic method, boiled, ladled, and shared, shaped later whisking practices, or if those streams simply run nearby. You carry the debate the way you carry a bowl, steadily, without spilling. When the signal arrives, it's small, a nod at the bell's dying echo, and everyone lifts together. The first sip greets your tongue without raising its voice. The second adds a warmth that seems to sit just behind your heart where worries usually hold their meetings. They take the night off. The elder's eyes crease at the corners in approval that doesn't ask you to perform joy. If tea had eyebrows, they would be raised only slightly. On the wall beside the Han board, characters whisper a reminder. Birth and death are the great matter. Time flies swift as an arrow. You are not in charge of the arrow tonight, but you are kindly in charge of the kettle. You touch the charcoal nest with 2 slow Tang movements, as if moving chess pieces in a game where no one loses. The pearls return on cue. The ladle dips and rises, the skim returns to the basin, and the bowls continue their short, sacred commute from wood to hand and back. A novice brings a basket of roof-dried leaves, another little fact disguised as casual. Monasteries often kept small tea plots or drying shelves under eaves, the roof tiles warming the leaf enough to coax a faint sweetness even on days stingy with sun. You imagine the yard in the afternoon, the tiles like sleeping fish, the air tasting faintly of leaf and clay. The novice sets the basket down and bows to the kettle, which is either strict etiquette or very good taste. Joke 3. The bell sounds again, a softer ring, the kind that makes your bones vibrate with patience. You time a pour to fall exactly as the tone thins, and the alignment gives you a satisfaction out of proportion to any recipe. The fish drum answers with a trickle of beats, tap, 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 and the room's breath synchronizes the way the alley's hum synchronized with your fan earlier. You've carried the city into the monastery and the monastery into your hands. Same water, same leaf, same attention, different roof. When the bowls empty, they do it without drama. A paler ring dries on each interior, like a tiny shoreline where thought receded. You rinse, wipe, return, and each gesture feels like returning a borrowed tool to the friend who trusted you with it. Outside, the pines write their tall cursive against a late moon, and the spring keeps talking to stone. Midnight passes without bragging. You find that tea has done what it promised, steadied breath between wooden bell strikes, made wakefulness gentle, and turned watching the night into being held by it. You leave the monastery by the side gate and follow the elder's sleeve through pines until stone gives way to beaten earth again, and the city grows back around you like a familiar coat. A courtyard waits 2 turns down, low walls, moonlight pooled on glazed tiles, a study lamp breathing a small halo onto a scroll. The poet has already set the brazier. You recognize the tools instantly. The same honest kettle, the gourd ladle that has learned humility, the bowl that prefers 2 hands to any speech. He gestures you in with the kind of welcome that doesn't make a noise. A cricket edits the edge of silence, helpful punctuation for the evening. He warms the bowl with the same rehearsal you practiced, and your fingers mirror him without discussing it first. A mainstream fact arrives, soft-footed. By the Tang, poetry and tea are frequent companions. Court poets like Bai Juyi praise quiet cups as easily as quiet gardens, and Lu Tong's 7 Bowls hymn turns drinking into a litany of moods, each bowl doing its small benevolent work on body and thought. The poet smiles because he can see you counting already. He lifts the scoop, snows in a little dune of green, and offers you the kettle as if offering you a verse to finish. Bowl 1. The thread lands on the inner slope. 2 small spirals. A skim as gentle as moving a cloud to the next room. You pass the bowl to yourself with 2 hands, not out of vanity, but because your hands now believe calm has a weight. The first sip is simply temperature, and then permission. Lips moisten, tongue registers grain and grass, shoulders release a single stubborn notch. You think involuntarily, first bowl, hello. The poet's eyebrows consent to this translation. Bowl 2 comes light as a moth. The surface has that satin behavior you chased earlier. You draw one slender comet through the center, and the aroma lifts its chin. You sip and feel a thin pain slide out of your chest, loneliness stepping outside for air. The courtyard seems to widen by one invisible arm's length. You almost make a joke about installing tea instead of windows, but you don't. You're busy being a window. Bowl 3 is for searching pockets. The poet ladles, you receive, and this time the swallow is not for taste, but for the brain's dusty drawers. Names of streets line up politely. A conversation you owed someone comes back with the right verbs. A line of a poem you didn't know you knew knocks once and enters your head with clean feet. You look at the brazier, the tidy nest, the windscreen's crescent, and realize how many tiny things have been quietly taking your side all evening, tools conspiring for clarity. If the cat were here, it would claim credit. Joke 2. Bowl 4 tastes like circulation remembering its job. Fingers cool off just enough to feel the rim anew, feet find their agreement with the tile. The night enters the bloodstream like a courteous guest bringing a shawl. A quirky tidbit, courtesy of gossip with a long memory. Some Tang hosts used tea steam as a lamp test, holding a tiny paper square above the bowl. If it fluttered without flipping, the boil was judged modest and the pour likely to be kind. You try this with a flake from the poet's scrap pile. It quivers like a satisfied leaf and then sits down again, which is exactly your mood. Bowl 5 loosens the knots in a day's rope. The poet murmurs something about pine wind, the sound of boiling water compared to wind through needles, and you remember hearing that phrase in the tea house kettle, as if the brazier had been practicing forest music all along. Historians still argue whether the 7 bowls sequence describes a widely enacted ritual or is mostly Lu Tong's poetic framework that readers borrowed for their own evenings, and whether gatherings mixed strict order with improvisation or performed a liturgy as predictable as the moon's opinions. Tonight, order holds just long enough to make your improvisations sound like memory. Bowl 6 becomes social, even if you're alone. The poet pours, and you set a second bowl beside the first as though an invisible guest has arrived carrying good stories and no demands. You take turns with yourself. It works embarrassingly well. Joke 3. The flavor is rounder now, the sweetness less shy, the citrus you never added bowing from very far back in the hall. A breeze stirs the vines on the wall, and the lamplight unbuttons another notch of gold. Bowl 7 is the one everybody remembers because remembering is its job. The poet's ladle lifts slowly, and you can almost hear the powder applauding the temperature you've kept with such ordinary mastery. The sip lands soft as silk pulled from a chest, cooler at the rim, warmer at the swallow, than a hush behind the breastbone that seems to tidy up the corners of your thinking. Worries decide to reschedule. Desires take off their shoes. Some versions of the old poem talk about contacting stars. What you feel is more domestic. Someone quietly straightening a picture on your wall that has been slightly crooked for months. The poet laughs once, a single syllable, the sound of someone recognizing a shared path. He points with his chin toward the moon pooled on the tiles, and you notice how the light makes a geometry you hadn't noticed in daytime. The grout lines a grid, the shadows braided like black silk cords. Your mind, softened by bowls, stops trying to solve the pattern and agrees to inhabit it instead. Above the wall, a neighbor's flax hangs from a pole like tired banners. You imagine it drinking moonlight, the way your bowl drank steam. A mainstream detail eases in between sips. Tang courtyards often double as studios, the well or jar in one corner, citrus peel drying under the eaves, a spare brazier ready for late guests. In letters, poets trade tea cakes as politely as they trade couplets, stamped with little clouds or beasts, a pocketable friendship that can be broken into travel-sized companionship. The poet taps the cake on his shelf, a cloud mark very much like the one you pressed earlier, and the sound is a dry, musical thock that promises mornings as well as nights. You return briefly to your map of water. Spring made this easier. River would have done. Well would have asked for another grain of salt and more patience. You listened, then poured, the poet says, as if summarizing a life. Historians still argue whether gatherings like this included entertainers, courtesans, or family in practice, despite manuals that imagine scholars in perfect control, and whether women's roles in tea and verse were quieter only on paper. The courtyard neither confirms nor denies. It holds space for argument and for breath. When the bowls finally rest, rims drying in the breeze, a paler ring ghosts each interior like a shoreline where wakefulness receded. You rinse and wipe, as taught, and the poet returns the tools to their customary places with the tenderness of someone straightening the hair of a friend who fell asleep on the couch. He says 7, and the number feels earned rather than counted. Your body answers with a yawn disguised as a deeper breath, the kind that folds the night around you like a book you don't mean to finish, but do. You look toward the alley and think of the cat, the lantern haze, the first tray, the first bowl. The tiles keep their cool, the lamp keeps its hush, the kettle ends with a sigh that could be gratitude or gravity. Either way, you hear it. You carry the night back to the tea house, the way a pond carries moonlight, without ripple, without hurry. The bench remembers you, the brazier remembers your hands. The cat remembers that it meant to supervise. You rebuild the nest, walnut, 2 plums, 1 modest parent, and set the windscreen just so. The spring jar waits like a friend who knows your step. You tip the kettle, hear the bright first consonant of water greeting metal, and feel the room line up behind your breath. The bowl sits warmed already, a horizon cupped between your palms. Powder falls in a calm dune. You don't straighten it this time. You know the pour will do that work in one motion if your wrist stays honest. The kettle's breath slides from fish eyes to pearls and stays there, as if language once found refuses to shout. You lift, and the spout's thread lands on the inner slope. No hop, no splash, just weather arriving over low hills the way you practiced with the poet and the monks and the alley's soft grammar. A mainstream fact folds into the steam like a note in a sleeve. Tang tea bowls are often celadon, you wear from the kilns of Zhejiang, glazes the color of river stones after rain, prized for how gently they hold heat and how kindly they show the liquor's shade. Your bowl answers that lineage with a fine, even gloss. The liquid brightens toward quiet jade. You draw 2 spirals, no more, and skip the skim. The collar forms, then remembers manners and settles on its own. Joke 1. The cat blinks like a judge who has seen this trick and approves its absence of trickery. You keep the kettle in one hand and let the other guide only a breath of ladle. 3 small circles, one wide, then nothing, then one comet through the center, to gather the little currents into one countryside. The aroma lifts its chin, grain, grass, a pine shadow, the hint of citrus you never invited, but which, like certain cousins, shows up with good bread. You angle the kettle a degree and return a scant mouthful to its lip, just to keep the plateau, just to keep the conversation warm, but not chatty. If this pour had a resume, it would list, does fewer things better. Joke 2. You listen for foam trying to rehearse a speech and hear only vowels. The bowl's surface takes lamplight in one unbroken sheet. When you tilt, the sheen moves all at once, satin that remembers to be water. You pass one bowl outward with 2 hands, then a second, then your own. No speech, no flourish, only that soft choreography you learned in section 10, when respect made warmth travel farther than talk. Under the bowls, small straw mats wear their season knots. Tonight, all 3 knots happen to be spring, which feels like the universe writing encore in twine. A quirky tidbit pads in with the cat. Some households quietly name their kettles Pine Wind, Old Moon, Little River, so repairs can be cataloged like tales, and so someone can say, Little River is breathing well tonight, without sounding like they've misplaced a relative. You make a note privately that your kettle has earned a name you won't say out loud in case names scatter luck. Joke 3. The spout's breath proves its credentials anyway. You sip. The first taste is the permission you remembered from the poet's courtyard. The second, the steadiness you borrowed from the monastery's bell. The third, a completely ordinary sweetness that nevertheless feels like a solved problem you can stop carrying. The room softens around the edges the way glaze softens a bowl's feet. Historians still argue whether our modern reconstructions of Tang tea, steamed leaves, pressed cakes, and bowl preparation reflect elite manuals more than common habit, and whether city tea houses boiled leaves directly more often than patient households did. Your hands, composing their own footnote, answer that the method that calms you is the method that endures. You refill with the economy of someone who trusts the wrist more than the rule. One ladle here, half there, a light skim only if a cloud forgets itself. The brazier's orchard glows evenly. The windscreen hums a faint tinny lullaby, and the cat arranges its tail into the ideogram for sufficient. You taste again, and this time the after-sweetness lingers behind the heart like a lantern deciding not to be wind. You think of the tiny poem once carved inside a gourd ladle, the line that completes by the third skim, and feel your own line complete. Listen, then pour. Bowls return as warm moons, lighter each time. You rinse, wipe, and set them upside down so dust cannot audition. The surface of the mixing bowl dries to a pale ring, a shoreline you've walked before. The spring jar is lower, your shoulders are lower, the alley's hush is lower still. You close the kettle's lid and hear the gentlest click, the kind of punctuation you want for all your endings. If anyone asked what you perfected tonight, you'd shrug and say, less. Fewer tolls within reach, fewer corrections, fewer names for bubbles, the same 3 breaths before decisions, the same steady hand that leaves the center of the bowl alone so the pour can polish it without help. You tidy the ash with 2 patient strokes. You spread the coals so their glow will sleep without sulking. You fold the cloth square on square. The cat yawns the longest word of the evening and writes its paw once across your sleeve, a signature you decide not to remove. You blow out one lantern and spare the other. In the mixed light, steam is barely visible, as shy as you feel triumphant. You stack the straw mats, spring knot on spring knot, and return the scoop to its little rest. Outside, the night market has gone to parchment. Inside, the bench keeps your outline for the next person who needs it. You gather bowl, sleeve, breath, and a portion of quiet you no longer have to chase. Wind down. You let the bench hold you a little more, letting your shoulders slide down as if they remember the path back to soft places, and the air eases around your wrists where the bowl warmed you, and the brazier's breath, slower now, hums in a narrow band that your ears understand as safe and steady, and the lantern light thins to a pleasant amber that doesn't ask the eyes to do any work at all. You notice how the kettle's skin cools in patient inches, and how the last curls of steam rise like pale threads and then decide to stay, and how the spring jar reflects a small coin of light that makes no demands and keeps no time. You let the night gather your steps, one by one, until walking is simply sitting, and sitting is simply resting, and resting is simply being held in a room that has learned your name without speaking it. And you remember the fish eyes and the pearls, and you remember the 3 small spirals that turned a hill of powder into a single surface, and you remember the gentle bow of 2 hands offering a warm horizon, and all of it becomes background, like the soft rush of a fan, like distant rain on a respectful roof. You promise yourself nothing complicated, only that you will breathe where the kettle breathed, and listen where the pour listened, and that when sleep leans in, it will find you already halfway there, with a quiet that doesn't insist, and a sweetness that doesn't announce itself, and a room that understands how to dim itself without going away. The cat has already closed its ledger. The windscreen has folded. The mats remember spring. The bowl keeps your fingerprints as a private map. When you're ready, you are. The lantern's amber will narrow to a single kind thread, and then to a thought, and then to a hush that holds. Good night. End of story. Sweet dreams.